this movie is extremely cinematic. Can you talk about your aesthetic choice to shoot on 35, and what does that form give your story?
I had this image early on when I wanted to make Louder Than Bombs of a car driving somewhere upstate New York under autumn leaves, and this kind of feeling that reminded me of perhaps a bit of films from the 70s, like Ordinary People, early 80s, like John Hughes movies or Kramer versus Kramer, these great character portrayals that American cinema has been so full of and that are seemingly tougher to make these days for financial reasons. So I wanted that kind of 35 millimeter look to the whole thing, and I've shot my 2 previous films on 35. I grew up on film set. I'm a 3rd generation filmmaker. I love the sound of 35 going through the camera. But more than anything, the secret's in the shadows. There's something about a 35 image when you start grading it, even though we do that digitally now, and you talk to the grader, they are like, oh, there's so much information here. There's so many ways to go. So I don't know. I love it. I might change one day, but I'm not dogmatic about it. But there is something quite soft and beautiful about a 35 image.
Can you talk about the challenges of co-writing this narrative? Because it's non-linear. There's a lot of VOs from different POVs, different characters, and it's very intricate. Talk about the process of creating that story.
So when I write with Eskil Vogt, we don't start out with a storyline first. What we do is we come up with characters and scenes, images, moments, and then we have way too much material, and then we try to structure that into a story. So it takes a long time to make these scripts. It's a more associative process than just having like a 3-line pitch. Our films are usually difficult to pitch, and that's challenging for the people that finance them, but I think ultimately I wanted to do a film that had a free form that could go with the characters to unexpected places rather than to just do more of a sort of streamlined narrative.
On Going to Unexpected Places, this movie has many themes. It's about dealing with grief, and also it talks about the importance of and persistence of memory and time. Talk about infusing your story with just the value of time and memory.
I think cinema or movies give themselves to time and memory as a format. You can show a memory and it will play out as present tense when you see it in front of you with the actors. So there's something interesting about that. I've been obsessed with memories since I was a kid. I remember as a 5-year-old discovering what memory was. I remember thinking about it and deciding when I was on a 3-wheel bike in kindergarten, this moment I'll remember for the rest of my life, and I still do. Touch wood. So I'm interested in that. And how does that play into how we perceive ourselves? How does it play into our relationship? And what happens, like in this film, when the siblings, the 2 brothers, Jesse Eisenberg and Devin Druid, have such discrepancies between how they remember their mother, and then bring the father into it who has a 3rd perspective. How could we tell a story that deals with the drama of memory? Like, no, mom was like this, no, she was like that. How differently, almost as if she was 3 different people or persons with these 3 different characters.
Do you feel with your aesthetic, and this is brilliant filmmaking, you mentioned the 70s and early 80s, do you feel like creatively you're swimming upstream with so many different type of tentpole movies, the way things are going with cinema today, or are they just 2 different equations and you just focus on what you want to do as an artist?
My responsibility is focusing on what I want to do with my stories, and as long as I get to make movies, I'll make them. I'm not going to speculate in commerciality. There's enough people doing that at the moment. I grew up with underground music, I grew up with punk, soul music in the 80s, sitting in Norway figuring out, what is the sound? Oh, it sounds like Kraftwerk. No, it's Afrika Bambaataa. Someone in South Bronx was doing something underground, and I was sitting on the other side of the world listening to hip-hop all of a sudden when I was 9 years old. They didn't do that to become commercial. They did it because it was a way to represent a feeling of a place and of a personality. So that's where I'm from, punk and hip-hop. That's what I grew up with. And I don't know. I mean, it sounds trite these days because everyone's supposed to be so smart and pedagogical about how they present their work. That's not what I'm into.
I just have a curious question. Elder Scrolls I'm an Elder Scrolls fan.
Oh, really?
Do you see, in many ways, we're talking about cinematic language. Do you think video gaming language can be actually cinematic, or maybe even a different form of communication these days?
Yeah. So we wanted to do a sort of 15-year-old kid and how he's a gamer and he plays Elder Scrolls and he's interested in that whole world. And I think we shouldn't judge. We should be open to the creative potential of gaming, But what is the challenge of games is how do they convey themes? What is the artistic element when we don't have a narrative that's pre-planned, but that plays out with someone gaming? I'm curious about that, but I'm not judging it. I think it's interesting, and it's a format that we should take serious.
My final question to you is, what continues to inspire you as a storyteller and a filmmaker? Do those motivations change as you mature as an artist, or do those principles and passions stay the same?
I find that I'm always inspired by watching movies. I'm a movie guy. Since I was a kid, I love being in a theater, watching the big images. It's really what I love. But I found that as I get older, more and more stories keep coming from my own life. I have more experience now, and I think that's perhaps the change. When I did my first shorts, I wanted to look like, I want them to be like Hitchcock or Kubrick. Now I guess I'm growing more into my own in a way, and finding more stories from my own life that inspires my narratives.